Paul McCartney performing Yesterday on The Ed Sullivan Show on the 12th of September 1965, one day before the single's release in the US. Not released as a single in the UK, Yesterday would go on to top the Billboard Hot 100 for 4 weeks, swiftly selling over 1 million copies. This success prompted Capitol Records to consider releasing a Paul McCartney album. On the 12th of October, Dave Dexter Jr., clearly in reply to an earlier memo from his boss Alan Livingston, titled Paul McCartney Album, outlined the impracticalities. Firstly, Capitol simply didn't have 11 unreleased McCartney tracks. Secondly, Dexter anticipated kickback, writing that Epstein and the 3 other guys would scream like hell if the package were built exclusively around Paul McCartney. Capitol had form in this area, earlier releasing Caroline No under Brian Wilson's name instead of the Beach Boys, without any input from anyone in the group. Furthermore, Livingston and Dexter were both keen to release as many Beatles albums as possible. By issuing a smaller number of tracks per album, utilising EP tracks as well as A and B sides, Capitol had managed to issue 8 LPs in 2 years by 1965, in comparison to only 5 issued by EMI in the UK over a much longer period. Sadly, this is the only memo publicly available. Whether Brian Epstein or the Beatles were approached is a matter of pure speculation. It may well have caused discontent in the group. There is considerable sarcasm when George introduces Paul on the Blackpool Big Night Out show, referencing Opportunity Knocks, an amateur talent show hugely popular in the UK at that time.
And this song's called Yesterday, and so for Paul McCartney of Liverpool, Opportunity Knocks.
Certainly, there were many early songs written by Paul which could have been developed for a solo album in 1965. In fact, 4 years later, John Lennon did propose in the final Apple board meeting that Paul should put out what George Harrison called Paul's fruity songs separate to Beatles albums. John Lennon's public criticism of Capitol's use of reverb and butchering of their albums did not endear him to Dave Dexter Jr. Shortly after his death, Dexter wrote an obituary for Billboard entitled Nobody's Perfect, calling Lennon intransigent and difficult to work with. This was so badly judged and ill-timed that Billboard had to issue an apology in their next issue. Eventually, Yesterday did surface on a US album, but under a Capitol package by the Beatles entitled Yesterday, and today, the furore caused by the original Beaches album cover for this album is the subject of another video on this channel. By then, Dave Dexter Jr. was no longer responsible for the Beatles' releases. It would be another 5 years before a solo Paul McCartney album would be issued by Capitol.